Good afternoon and welcome, everybody. So happy to have you at this session titled The Generative AI Decision Tree, Industry Recommendations for Ethical Selection of Large Language Models in Higher Education. I'm Dr. Kathleen Tate, the Editor-in-Chief of the Journal of Online Learning Research and Practice and Department Chair of Teaching and Professor at APUS, and will be the chair of this session. Before we begin, I would like to remind everyone to please mute your microphones to avoid background noise. If you have questions for the presenters, please type them in the chat box and they will be addressed at some point or during the Q&A session at the end. It is now an honor to introduce presenters Dr. Todd Cherner and Dr. Teresa Folger, and I'll hand it over to them.
Great. Hi, everybody. Happy to see where everyone's checking in from. I saw my home state on there, so go Florida. So as Katie said, we will be presenting on our topic today. Let me get my slide deck going. And today we'll be introducing a generative AI decision tree along with a synthesis of ethical considerations. And so this is a work that Teresa and I have been engaging for a little bit. And today what we'd like to do, we'll start with a bit more of a formal introduction, followed by a background of the study and our methodology. And one of the things that we'll do with the methodologies, we'll actually talk through the process to how we arrived at our findings. And then after that, we'll present our decision tree and then an open conversation. So that being said, a little bit about myself, and I'll turn it over to Teresa. I took ridiculous pictures of us. So I direct the Masters of Arts in Educational Innovation, Technology, and Entrepreneurship program here at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And I spend my days thinking about educational technology and innovations and how they can be used effectively and responsibly for teaching and learning across K-12 and into higher education. Teresa, you want to share a little bit about yourself? Teresa says, oops, I'm muted. Let me start again.
Yeah, so Todd and I are like brother and sister. Thank you, Todd. Really nice to be here. Good to see everybody. And thanks for continuing to add where you're from in the chat. That's fun for me. I work at Arizona State University. I'm professor of educational technology. I have always conducted my research on that cutting edge of innovation. My love and my interest is in helping innovators and early adopters show their stuff and share their practice. So Todd and I connected, as you can see on this introduction slide, through SITE, the Society for Information Technology and Teacher Education. We're both leaders in the Teacher Education Council. So we oversee the SIGs that are associated with teacher education and technology in that arena. It's really fun to work with Todd, but I'm grateful for the opportunity. So take it away, Todd.
Fantastic. And I'll also say that I met Katie through SITE. So if you're thinking about different organizations that are out there, it's been a very good organization to me. So moving forward, we're going to start with the background and the foundations of AI and ethics. And so this is not all of them by a long shot, but these are three very foundational documents, foundational efforts or initiatives that really provided a baseline. So you have the Alsamore principles, you have the Montreal Declaration of Responsible AI, and the Toronto Declaration. And what these organizations did is they convened their groups, and collectively they each put out these different ideas about what it means to use AI ethically. Now, interesting, I'm sure you're looking over here on the left and you'll see the dates and you'll be like, but ChatGPT didn't come out until November 2022. And you're right, ChatGPT did not come out until then. So when they were creating these ethical guidelines, they were actually talking about AI systems. Over the course of time, you'll see that there's a lot of transferability between AI systems to generative AI, although there might be some that don't transfer as well. And we can get into that a little bit later. But what's important to know is that there's a grounding for this, a foundation for this, but these grounding principles and foundations have not been formally adopted by a company, organization, or government, but they have informed them. And so that's where we wanted to start from. Moving forward, we use something called a content analysis to analyze a large set of these ethical frameworks. And so specifically, I tend to use Zhang and Wildemuth's guide. So they lay out a very nice 8-step process for it. And what you'll see here is I actually list the steps of the process on the left, and then I'll talk through them about how I actualize them on the right. And again, Teresa will chime in from time to time and share out about that. But the first step of the process is preparing the data. And so content analysis can be used on a variety of different documents, elements, phenomenon. So if you have a text-based document, as we do in this case, step one's kind of a little quicker because it's already text. But if you were to analyze images or videos or something of that nature, you would actually have to convert that into text, maybe through transcriptions or rich, thick descriptions. But so we went ahead and we prepared the data, and then we had to define the unit of analysis. So the unit of analysis is the actual guidelines that you're going to that are going to inform how AI is used. And so I picked the Athlia framework, which is actually by the Rolls-Royce company. It's one of the most excellent frameworks I've seen to date. So tip of the hat to the Rolls-Royce. But the way they did it is they have these larger thematic areas here on the, and you can see this one, social impact. And then they try to contextualize where that area is. For our purposes, I was interested in the ethics behind it. And they actually have a column that talks specifically about the ethics. And then they work to operationalize that with the principles section here, the realization principles. So when I'm defining the unit, I'm wanting to know what is the ethical guidelines. There are details and they might package it in a different way, but those guidelines are very important. So once we have the guidelines set, then we develop categories for the process. And the categories are really interesting because you can do the categories from an inductive and deductive nature. So deductively, that means based on prior existing knowledge. So when we were reviewing the scholarship around AI ethics, when we were reviewing the categories themselves, we found some themes, some categories that just cut across, that were there, that were well established. And you can see examples of them, right? So we identified themes of cyber attacks, and then we operationalize them. The same thing with policy and so on and so forth. And then outside of that, we have inductive. And this, I'll explain this a little bit more in a second. And so inductive is when you're actually going through the analysis. When you're going through the analysis and you're like, okay, these are outliers. They don't fit clearly into the actual categories that had been surfaced by previous research. Rather, these are ones that we need to construct and develop based on our analysis. And so in this way, you have inductive and deductive. Once you have this, you have your categories, you begin to code the data. So we were looking through those different ethical guidelines, and what you'll see here is you'll see these categories, and you'll see how they populate it. I want to pause here, and I want to give you all kind of some context. Teresa, can you please drop into the chat the handout of all the documents? So Teresa and I prepared a Google Doc that literally lists 30 guidelines published by different 10 from governments, 10 from industry, so companies, and then 10 from researchers, right? So people who have actually identified these. And so we actually applied these categories and we used it to code that data. And so I want to show you what that looked like because it was absolutely fascinating. So this is a snapshot, and we're going to zero in here in a second, but this is actually a snapshot. And so what happened was myself, I trained a doc student, her name is Mags, And she and I actually went through line by line of all those different ethical guidelines that Teresa just shared, and we mapped them onto this coding matrix that it was talked about in the previous slides. What you'll see from a distance, and this is why you kind of have that 10,000 foot level, is what you'll see is that the preponderance of data was actually coded at this top layer. I understand you can't read this right here, but this is just for visuals, right? So you have like, it really coalesces, and you can see that we color coded this so we can make easy comparisons. That way, when we assess our coding, we can start to make some checks. So to blow in here, you can see I'm in the orange and Mags is in the yellow. My favorite color is orange. That's why I picked it. And so when we were coding, we were both coding from the government documents from Hong Kong, and we had the actual link right here in our spreadsheet. And we're looking at privacy risk, right? And we're saying, where in privacy risk is this addressed? Or where in these guidelines, excuse me, does it address privacy risk? And so we have the term privacy risk. We have the operationalization of that term. And then both Mags and I identified this cell as addressing that topic. Then we found algorithmic discrimination, right? So again, we operationalized that on pre-existing scholarship on that. The Algorithms of Impression, if you haven't read that book, highly recommend it. Talks in great detail. And we're like, okay, this is where it addresses it. Now, what becomes more interesting as you go on is you'll see with accountability and trust building, you'll see I found 3 areas where I'm like, this addresses that. Mags only felt 1. So when we started to evaluate our consistency of the codings, we had internal conversations to sort through and filter our discussions or our decisions that we had to make. And you can see this kind of carries on through our entire coding process. I will tell you that this coding process, tedium is the word that comes to mind. We really took our time to go through it in great detail. And when we identified challenges, we talked them out, and then we did a statistical procedure called a Pearson's correlation coefficient to ensure that our final decisions were aligned at a significant rate. And so from there, these are our findings, and then we'll get into our decision tree. What we found, and this was really interesting, we wanted to first look at this by areas, right? So if you remember over here, we have areas, and then we have we have themes, and then we have areas. I misspoke there. And so you can see our themes coming down here on the right-hand column. And what you'll notice, and I found this to be really interesting, is inclusion and disclosure, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a second, along with development and deployment, tend to be the top themes that come up. As you move down, and this is under an ethical consideration, not a use situation, an ethical consideration. Then when it comes down to the functionality or what the technology actually does, or the quality in which it does it, which is down here a little bit more, you'll see that those are actually less of ethical concerns compared to how the AI actually treats people. This is a significant finding. As you go on this next one, this is a little bit smaller. We wanted to actually separate this out and look at it by our different groups, right? So how did academics treat these areas of ethics compared to industry, compared to government? Teresa and I have a paper right now submitted to Tech Trends that's under review to where we talk about this a bit more in detail. But from this analysis, and I think this is the major contribution of our paper and our probably the crux of our presentation, is actually we get into the decision tree component. And so I'm going to talk through this, and then I'll allow Teresa to provide some implications and her thoughts. So when we think about the decision tree, we very much have it leveled into 2 sections, right? We have the local and social on the first one, and then the second one is a little bit broader. And then you'll see what the way that this is designed is we talk about level 1 and we talk about level 2, and then we pose questions about these different areas. Now, I have not seen a tool where I'm going to answer yes to all these questions. And I've looked at several dozens, hundreds of tools at this time. It's kind of my life right now. There's not one where I'm answering yes to all these. So as you use this decision tool, you have to use your professional judgment and decide whether a tool is in the acceptable range for you. Does it provide a preponderance of evidence that, yes, this is ethical and useful? So let's talk through these. So at the local impact, and this is how AI is going to impact individuals in their communities, privacy and risk. Does the tool securely store data and not share it without permission, right? We enter data into these tools that we use. Our prompts are a form of data. When we register, it's a form of data. How is that AI tool actually handling that data? Is it selling it behind our back? Is it being forthright about it? Is it holding it securely? That's privacy and risk. When we move it into algorithmic discrimination, we ask, does the tool provide methods for reporting instances of stereotypes, biases, or misinformation about groups of people to the developers? I will tell you very strongly that I believe all tools are going to have forms of bias in them. I think that humans create these tools and that it comes down to human nature a little bit. The question is, when these are actually identified, when they're generated, what mechanism do the developers and owners of that Gen AI tool take to improve their algorithm and for users like you and me to actually report that information? That is algorithmic discrimination. Yes, that is going to appear, especially when these tools are still evolving so rapidly. But how are the developers and companies responding to it? I think that's very important. The third is transparency. Are the policies about data sharing and terms of service easily accessible, both in availability and language? So by transparency, what I mean is, if you want to know how your data is being handled by the tool, is that information easy to find? If you do a quick search for it, can you locate it quickly or not? And then when you do locate it, my question is the accessibility of language. Is it written in dense, legal, technical language? Or is it accessible to people who don't have expertise of that knowledge or in that language, excuse me. So that's the foundational. Then we move up to level 2, which is social impact. In this one, well-being. Is the tool environmentally sustainable and designed to benefit society and all communities? I will tell you, Gen AI is thirsty. They use a lot of water. They use a lot of energy. What's the company doing to make their products as sustainable as possible? And how are they helping society? Or are they not helping society? And are they trying to riff something from society for profit? These are some central concerns. Humanism, excuse me. This is where you get into human in the loop. Do humans actively monitor the tool, and can users opt out to interact with humans instead of the tool if they're required to use the tool? So am I forced to use this tool? I use Canva a lot. Canva doesn't force me to use the Gen AI tool, but it's in their tool. And so am I informed about it? Do I have to use it? So these are larger questions that I really get into. And then if I am forced to use a tool, do I have an option to talk to a human? That's important. And you see that come up a lot with those foundational guidelines that I started with. And then the next part is collaboration and inclusion. Was the tool developed using input and feedback from multiple stakeholders? So was it just some people in a room that made some decision about Gen AI? Or was design thinking used? Was human co-construction used? How were individuals like you and me used in actually creating it? Now we move into layer 2, and following this, I'll turn it over to Teresa. So layer 2 gets into design and deployment. You can see under development, there is a lot of information here, right? So as we get into accountability and trustworthy, will the developers take responsibility if their tool is being misused? What will the developers actually do when they find that there might be some nefarious actions? Demystification. Was the tool designed to provide insights to users about how it generates content or links to the sources that form the basis for the content and created. By this, what we're talking about is oftentimes you get the black box, right? How did Gen AI come up with this? Well, it's a black box. We don't know. Yes and no. At some levels, it is a black box, but there are definitely other tools that provide links to the sources used by the Gen AI to create the responses. That presents some demystification. And we can talk about specific tools later if you'd like, because there are challenges with those tools as well. Fair use. Was the data used to train the tool legally and ethically sourced, right? We know that OpenAI and ChatGPT, they took a lot of people's information and data without permission. And there are lawsuits that are being settled about this. The New York Times, for instance, had a big lawsuit about that. So how are they using data? Was that data trained? Are they using open source data, and are they using their own data, or are they taking people's data? That's a big question. Profit, and this kind of goes back to the level 2 of community. Are these people using AI to create a profit? And if they are, which is totally fine, but if they are they disclosing how they are earning that profit? Is that transparent? Notification. If you're using a Gen AI tool, are you being told that you're actually using a Gen AI tool, or are you being duped to think that you're being engaging with a human? Cyber attacks. Does the tool provide documentation about the way it was designed to be secure and repel potential cyber attacks? We know that Gen AI can be used for not great actors. How can we deal with that? And then moving on to level 4. This is the deployment. This is the functionality of what Gen AI actually does. Does the tool hallucinate, right? How factual is the tool? Cross-reference. Is the information and content produced by the tool aligned with established, credible knowledge on the topic? Again, this kind of goes back to hallucination. If I'm asking Gen AI about a specific topic and it's giving me misinformation, and I start cross-referencing it, or you prompt it to cross-reference it, and you see this disconnect, that's problematic. Currency. Is the tool up to date? We know when the original ChatGPT was released, its cut date, well, I think was like January 2021. If anything happened after January 2021, the tool did not know. So this is important to be current, right? Is it up to date? With that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Teresa and allow her to make some comments, and then we'll open it up to open conversation.
Great, thank you. A lot to take in, everybody. So thank you for listening. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about the use of the tool, because I'm hoping a lot of you are here for that reason. So this decision-making tree then is to help us select tools. It doesn't really tell us how we can utilize the tools. It tells us the ethics behind tool selection. So in our mind, we're thinking practitioners in the field who have a systematic way for going about being diligent on the ethics surrounding tool selection might help shape that cutting edge, right? So we all know we walk with our feet, and these tools are out there to make money. And so if we select the tools or we don't select the tools, that can shape that cutting edge of innovation. So we're hoping that this synthesis of 30 documents, right? The current documents that we can find out there from government, research, and industry will help you all make sense of the messages from those various organizations and entities in practice. So super curious about your thoughts on boundaries, values, needs, what you see happening in the field. And Todd, maybe we can bring up the decision tree again yeah, that's great. In your thoughts about the practical side of this and maybe who it might be useful for, is there information missing? Is the structure helpful? The level 1, level 2, level 3, and level 4? And who needs access to this tool? So can we have Kathleen, I'm not sure the best way to involve participants.
Um, I don't see any questions in the chat. Maybe just ask them, what they're thinking of this so far.
Yeah, no, I have. I just am curious if people are able to contribute. I didn't know if they were muted by the system.
Oh, as far as speaking, I'm not sure. Kenjo, can you tell us? But they should be able to post things in the chat. Kenjo, can they speak as well, the participants? Or only the panelists?
If anyone wants to speak, you can raise your hands and I can unmute you.
Okay, perfect.
So any instructional designers out there, I'd be super curious how you see this as being useful. They're all dumbfounded, Todd.
Yeah, took their breath away.
Um,
Well, we'll go ahead and we'll hang on there in case someone has some questions or not. And if you would like to talk to us more about this, this is Teresa and my email here. And we are conducting a survey about your use of Gen AI. So if you'd like to scan this QR code and share your thoughts on that survey, that would be great. And if not, Katie and Kinjo, is there anything else we need to address? Thank you, Ruben.
No. So thanks everybody for your time.
Yes, thank you so much for this presentation. I know I'm trying to absorb it. It's going to take me a while to process, but I'm very interested in the color coding you did. And I'll be reaching out to you, Todd, for sure about that. But thank you everyone for attending the session. Again, thank you to our presenters, Drs. Turner and Folger, who gave us a lot to think about. And this is a good time for a short break as the next session sessions will begin in about 15 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate you.